It's called a 5-word review, Mr. Pilgrim. Scott Pilgrim vs. the World is probably going to become my favorite comedy of all time. And a good part of that is that it's not just a comedy. It's a comedy with action, but it's better at the action than the comedy. And the comedy's still top-notch. So Scott Pilgrim follows the story of this kid, I'm sure you know from the trailer, who meets a girl and he falls in love with, and he has to defeat her 7 evil ex-boyfriends in order for him to go out with her. So it's a very typical storyline, but where the movie gets really great is how inventive it is with everything else. The comedy is so over the top. It's really cheesy, and the dialogue is intentionally really stupid, but at the same time, there's such perfect, flawless, awesome comic timing for some of these jokes. There's some jokes that, you know, are just constant throwing at you of, you know, one-liners and laughter, and at the other time, it's jokes that actually set you up, and then they have punchlines, and they're just great, and you don't see them coming, and they're awesome. So the comedy in this, I guess to start off, is awesome. And on top of that, this movie, as far as I can remember, and I'm honestly trying to remember, this movie had the best fight scenes I have ever seen in my life. And half of this movie is just fight scenes, but it's okay. They're not, I mean, they're stupid, but in a way where the movie is very self-aware. It knows exactly what it's trying to be, and it never tries to do anything that an action comedy shouldn't do. Everything that an action comedy should do, this movie does perfectly, and I'd say it does over the top. To the point that it's just excessively great. There's something else that occurred to me after I was done with the movie, is that the villains in this movie, although each villain isn't in for very long, these are some of the best supervillains, and they're literally supervillains, you know, they have superpowers. They're some of the best supervillains I've ever seen, because they're hilarious, but they're also really badass. And it's like, you love to hate them, because they're stupid and their dialogue is cheesy and some of them are dumb, but at the same time, they either, you know, they're master fighters, or they have psychic powers, or they can summon dragons with music. Yeah, it's crazy. Just wait till you see. And the way this movie builds up with the 7 X's, it's so great, because it starts off with just an awesomely choreographed fight scene, just a fist fight between Scott Pilgrim and the first ex-boyfriend, and then from that you go to I think it's the actor. After that, yeah, you go to kind of more of a silly fight scene that ends, you know, comedically more than it does with action. And then it goes back to the action, and then you get a surprise with the 4th X, and it just builds up really well. And every fight throughout the movie in order each one gets either more and more funny or more action-packed. And there's a lot of, like, I won't say twists with the fight, but things that you don't predict. And when they come up, you just say, oh, this is going to be so awesome. It's hard for me to talk about a movie that I love, because, I mean, I could talk about the exact same things over and over, or I could just give you my 5 words until you go see it. So I think I'm going to do that. I'm just going to wrap this up really quick. Scott Pilgrim, I'm going to confidently say my favorite comedy of all time. More than likely my favorite action movie of all time. This director, this is the guy who also, if you're not hooked now, get this is the guy who did Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz, so he knows what he's doing. And I have always considered Shaun of the Dead to be an unbeatable comedy. I've thought that there are movies that are like funnier, like I actually laughed more, like with Hot Rod and Cloudy, but Shaun of the Dead for me has always been like the best, most well-rounded, well-made comedy of all time. And I won't say that Scott Pilgrim beat Shaun of the Dead as far as how well-made it is, how good it is. But the action in Scott Pilgrim, which it doesn't seem to be even trying to do, go for. The action is awesome, so over the top. I mean, every single time one of the X's comes up, you get Scott Pilgrim, on one side of the screen, and then X on the other side, and then in the middle it says VS, versus, and it's like, oh, yes, awesome. Because you always know exactly when the fight's going to happen, and every fight is better than the previous one. The fight at the end, I was I won't call it disappointing, but it's like by the end, by the 7th X, you're kind of like everything. You've just seen all of the awesome, and they can't possibly make it any more awesome. It's still really great. The ending is just awesome. I keep saying awesome. The ending is so radical. Let's go with radical. But at the same time, it's kind of like, yeah, you've seen everything, and it's just so good that they couldn't possibly make it even more good by the end of the movie. So, Scott Pilgrim. My final 5 words I'm gonna say are stylized, and I guess that's something I should kind of elaborate on. Because the movie, something else I actually forgot to mention is this is the best video game movie ever. It's not based on a video game, it's based on a comic, for those of you who don't know. But the whole movie is a video game. I don't mean it's like a video game, I mean it really is a video game at a lot of points. Like, Scott Pilgrim eventually gets an extra life, and there's a lot of references to Zelda, Final Fantasy, Mario, and I mean a lot. And they aren't just stupid references that are for adults. They're for actual hardcore, video game nerds who are going to understand the references. And they're very funny and well-placed. And even if you don't get them, you're still going to chuckle at them, and it's not the whole movie. So stylized, absurdly funny, self-aware, it knows what it's trying to be, and it does that so well. Dazzling, the visuals. This is the first movie that I can say I really want to see in 3D. But it's not out in 3D. But if they had filmed this for 3D, this would have been a stunning movie. Dazzling, and finally, over the top. Everything is just so overcharged, or overkill, and the most excessive amount of violence and comedy, but they do it so well. So Scott Pilgrim, overall, I give this, I'd say, a 9.7 out of 10. There are a couple points where I felt it was kind of low. It was never bad, but just where I was kind of, I don't know, I just slipped out of it for a few minutes. But go see this, because even if you don't like the humor, the action is top-notch. And if you don't like the action, then the humor is top-notch.